Welcome to step number 3 of the invisible part sew-in hairstyle. In this step, I will show you in detail, step by step, how to sew on your hair extensions. First, I will show you how to prepare your needle and thread. Next, I will show you how to sew on your wig cap, and then finally, I will show you in detail how to sew on your extensions. In this step, before you begin your sewing process, you first must know how to prepare your needle and thread. So the type of needle that you want to have is called a curved needle or a C needle. This needle is extremely helpful when doing your sew-in extensions because as soon as you feed the needle under the braid, it comes directly back out of your braid because of its shape. I believe this is the easiest needle to use when doing your sew-in extensions. Some people prefer straight needles, but for beginners, I suggest that you use a curved needle. Also, you want to make sure that you have your sewing thread. Make sure that your sewing thread matches close or exactly the color of your extensions. My extensions is a dark brown color, so I am choosing to use dark brown sewing thread. The reason why you want to match your thread to your extensions is to make sure that if at all you're able to see through your hair, which you shouldn't, you're not going to see light colored thread. Also, you will need some hair cutting scissors or just regular scissors to trim off the thread as you prepare your needle. So to begin, I am going to take my spool of thread and I'm going to unroll a couple of inches of thread to show you how to prepare your needle. When you are preparing your needle, I suggest that you unravel about 1 foot to 2 feet of thread for sewing purposes. The more thread you unravel, the less thread you have to continue to put on your needle. When you put a small amount of thread, you have to continue to wind extra needles because you will run out frequently. So now that I've unwinded some thread, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut the thread from the spool. And this is how much thread I have. Remember, this is for demonstration purposes that I'm only using a small amount of thread to show you how to prepare your needle. So now you're going to take one end of your thread, you're going to feed it through the eye of the needle. Now you're simply going to pull that end through and meet it to the other end of your thread. Make sure to match both ends up. Then you're simply going to take both pieces, wrap it around your finger to create a knot. Once you create your knot, you will notice that you have some thread that sticks above the knot. You want to make sure that you use your scissors and cut that thread because if you don't, the thread will stick straight up from your style. So you're going to take your scissors and just trim directly above the knot. And that is simply how you create your needle and thread for your sewing style. Remember, use a small amount of thread to help you prevent tangles and knots. If you can handle more thread at once, then put as much thread on your needle as you would like. Next, I will show you how to sew your wig cap onto your head. Now that you have prepared your needle and thread, you want to take your wig cap and place it directly over your braids. So here in my hand, I have your typical standard black wig cap. You're simply going to open up this wig cap and make sure to stretch it over your head until the cap covers all of the braids, including your perimeter braid. Now that your cap is stretched and it's overextended past your perimeter braid, next, we will take our needle and thread and sew our wig cap onto our braids. Now that you have placed your cap over your braids, we are going to begin sewing on with our needle and thread. So before you begin sewing your cap down to your braids, you want to make sure you use your hands to feel exactly where your perimeter braid is and where the base of your actual invisible part will be. So as I take my hand and feel along my hair, I can feel that this braid is the only braid that's closest to my hairline. So this is my perimeter braid and this is where it starts. As I feel along with my finger, I can feel it wind all the way around my hairline And as it goes to the back, it continues to go all the way up to the left side of my ear, and it winds directly above my head here. Now you want to make sure you know exactly where your braids are for the base of your invisible part, which is somewhere in this section. So if I feel with my fingers, I can feel my little miniature braids here on both sides. And then I could feel my scalp that's going to show right here in the middle of my invisible part base. So once you start to sew around your perimeter braid, you're going to make sure to sew around the base of your invisible part style. So now that you have your finger positioned at the beginning of your perimeter braid, we are going to begin sewing the wig cap onto our braids. So now you want to take your curved needle and feed it directly through the cap. And I'm going to go exactly where my finger is. I'm going to go through the cap, under the beginning of my perimeter braid, and back through the cap. Once you do that, you're going to pull the needle through and pull the string as well all the way through until your knot stops you. Once you get to this point, you're going to take your knot out just a little bit to open up the thread. And now this is where we will do our knotting technique. This process remains the same as we knot our extensions and also as we sew on the wig cap to our braids. So what you do, you're simply going to take one side of the string, either this side or this side, and wrap it around twice and pull through. So I'm going to take the needle, wrap it around the string once, twice, and pull all the way through. This will create a solid knot at the base of my braids. So now as we go over a little bit more, I will show you once again how to do your knot. And the way that I like to measure it is to use my finger, whether I use my pinky or my index, and measure between the break of my finger to the end of my finger. So at this point, I'm going to take my needle again, feed it through the cap, under the braid, and back through the cap. So I'm simply just putting it right directly on and just scooping directly under the braid. You're going to pull through and bring your string up. This time we're not going to break open the thread, but we're simply going to take the needle, wrap it around once, wrap the string around twice, and pull through to create our second knot. So now once again, I'm going to go that same distance over down my perimeter braid. One more time, take your needle, scoop it all the way around the braid to feed back through the cap. And you're going to pull your needle all the way through. Now that you've pulled the string up just a little bit, you take your needle, wrap it around the string once, twice, and pull your needle all the way through to create your third knot. So that's a very easy technique for doing your knotting technique as you go all the way along your perimeter braid. So as you sew all the way around your perimeter braid, you are going to end up here at the beginning of your other perimeter braid, and that is where you want to start to sew around the base of your invisible part to connect to this knot once again. So far, I have sewn around my perimeter braid. I started on the right side, and I began to sew all the way around my hairline braid, going directly behind my head and also coming back out on the left side until I reach the end of my perimeter braid. Now these two small braids here serve as the base of your invisible part. This is the scalp that will be revealed with the final results, and these miniature braids along the way will have sewn extensions onto them to form an invisible part. So in order to form your invisible part, you want to make sure that as you sew down your perimeter braid, you begin to sew around your miniature braids here. So from this point, you are going to sew straight up through the braids, each of the braids you see here at the base of them, and go directly all the way around your invisible part base. And you're going to continue to sew all the way down until you reach that point. So now, as you can see, I have begun to sew around my actual base area of my invisible parts section. So I started here at my perimeter braid, and I began to go alongside each of these individual braids, and I began to sew through the braid and also through the cap all the way around into my rectangle shape until I reach the left side of my head. Now at this moment, I'm going to show you the same thing is continuing. I'm going to continue to form knots and create my last knot here on my perimeter braid, making sure that I still have all of my miniature braids intact for my invisible part base. So I'm going to finish and just continue to sew and connect to the perimeter braid of my head. So remember, the same technique applies. I'm gonna go at the bottom of that braid here from the little miniature braid I braided, and I'm going to put my needle through that braid, pull it through, and do my same knot technique. Take the needle, wrap it around the thread once, twice, and pull all the way through. And now I'm gonna go right here on and make that last final stitch onto my perimeter braid. I'm gonna go through the braid, pull the needle through, wrap it around the string once, twice, and pull through. To make sure that knot is secure in place, I'm just gonna once again place another knot on it. So through my braid, directly underneath that knot, go through the cap and wrap it around the string twice. Once, twice, and pull through. So now that you have securely sewn all the way around your perimeter braid and also all the way around the base of your actual invisible part area, you're going to cut this string off, and then you're going to trim off all this excess cap that's around your hairline and also the excess cap that's in the middle of this section here. So I'm going to take my scissors, I'm going to trim off my thread, making sure not to cut any knots. Then I'm going to simply grab the cap, cut a little opening to help me cut up alongside where my actual scalp is for my invisible part. Don't be afraid of cutting your hair because along this part, all of your hair is braided. Make sure to lift the cap and only cut the cap. Also, when you're cutting alongside your thread, make sure you do not cut snug against each individual knot. You want to give just a little bit of space of cushion of cap around your actual thread. This ensures that the cap will not come down or you will not accidentally cut any knots. So for example, I will show you here that you just want to snip close to the actual thread. You want to make sure not to snip any knots or too close against the knots itself. So as you can see here, that's about how much space of cap you want to leave. Leave just a little bit of space to make sure your knots stay intact. And then you're going to do the same thing to this side, and you're also going to trim off this excess cap that hangs around your hairline. So now that you've cut all of your cap around your head, this is what it should look like. You want to make sure that you free the cap in this area where your invisible part base will be. And then you want to make sure that you've trimmed off carefully all the way around your hairline. If in fact you have made a mistake and you've snipped too close to your cap, you're simply going to have to apply another wig cap and redo your sewing. Make sure that the cap is still in place after you cut all of the excess cap on your head. Next, I will show you step by step how to sew your extensions onto your head. Before you begin to sew on your hair extensions, you want to make sure that you measure out 2 pieces of hair that you must sew first. So first, we will measure out a piece of hair that starts here at our perimeter braid, and it goes directly all the way around our hairline and ends here at our perimeter braid. Then next, you're going to measure out your second piece of hair that has to go around the base of your invisible part. So after we've measured our first piece and cut that extension, we're going to take the extensions again, place it at the beginning of our perimeter braid, and measure it all the way around the actual part of our invisible part base. So this will serve as your perimeter to help you when you are sewing on your extensions. By making sure you have it completely sewn around your hairline and also a portion sewn all the way around your invisible part base, it makes it easy to just fill in and sew in the rest of your hair. So now from this point, you're just simply going to take your extensions. I'm going to bring it around my head. And you're going to place it at the point here at the beginning of your perimeter braid. So now once you have it held with your finger, you trace the extensions all the way around your perimeter braid hairline, and you bring it up to meet the other part of your perimeter braid here, right at the beginning. So this is your first measurement of your extension piece you need. Make sure that once you place at the beginning of your perimeter braid that you overextend just a little bit to make sure you've cut enough hair. So when we sew this down, it's going to be sewed directly on our perimeter braid, but just overextend a little bit more of your extensions to cut. So now that it's wrapped around my head, I'm going to trim that piece. So from this point, you want to take your scissors and simply snip your extensions. Now I'm going to move that piece of hair we've cut to the side. And next you are going to measure it entirely around the base of your invisible part. So you're going to take the beginning of your extensions, place it right there at the beginning of the base, exactly here. And then you're going to measure around with your finger and hold the hair into place to make sure it reaches. So I'm just using my fingers to guide me all the way around my invisible part base. Bring the extensions over. And just continue to measure all the way around. So now once you reach down to this point at the side of your invisible part base, you're going to overextend a little bit of hair just in case to make sure it fits. So at this point here on my fingers, I'm going to remove the extensions and I'm going to use my scissors to cut that part. Now we're going to remeasure again both of our pieces to see how they match up. So now I'm just going to put this over my head, and this is the part that goes around my actual invisible part base. I'm going to start it here at the beginning, measure it all the way around my head to see how it fits. And it's a little bit overextended, and that's perfectly normal because you want to make sure you have enough hair. So now I'm going to measure my second piece that goes around my perimeter braid. So I'm going to place this hair behind my head, take one part, put it at the beginning of the perimeter braid, wrap it around my head, and bring it around to the other part. And as you can see, this side overextended as well. So next, I will show you how to position your needle and thread on your extension track piece to begin sewing on your hair. Before you begin sewing on your extensions, you want to make sure that you already have your needle and thread positioned on the weft of your hair. The weft of the hair is the binding that holds these individual pieces of strands together. So this is a track piece because you have a weft here that's stitched along the hair fibers that's holding all of your hair that's coming out of the bottom of your extensions. So now what we're going to do is take our needle and thread and sew directly through the weft only at the beginning of our track piece to position the needle and thread on it. So now I'm just gonna bring this track piece over to the side, and we're gonna start at this very corner. At this very corner, you are gonna make sure to take your needle and put it directly through the weft at the beginning of this track piece. So now I'm gonna go ahead and reach for my needle. I'm going to unwind my thread. And now I'm going to begin stitching. So take your needle and place it directly through the weft at the beginning of your track piece. By doing this, this helps you have a sturdy start as you sew on your extensions. So I'm going to put it through the weft. And bring the needle through and my string all the way through until my knot stops me in place. Now that my knot is there, I'm going to pull my knot out just a little bit and do my same knotting technique for my extensions. I open the thread, take my needle, wrap it around once, twice, and pull through. So now once again, this time I'm going to go around the actual weft to secure. So I take my needle, put it directly underneath the weft so it should come through the hairs at the bottom. And then I'm going to create that same knot once again. With the same technique, I'm going to wrap it around the string once, twice, and pull all the way through. Now remember, you only want to sew through the weft at the beginning of your track piece. As you're sewing on your extensions, you're going to sew around the weft through the hair at the bottom and sew all the way up on your track piece of your extensions until you reach the very end of the other side, and your last two knots will actually be through the weft. You will put a knot through the weft, and then your last knot will be around the weft to secure the entire piece. So now that you have your knot placed on your weft and through your weft, we can begin to securely start sewing this hairpiece extension onto our perimeter braid. So now that your needle and thread has been positioned on your hair extensions, we will begin by sewing the extensions onto our braids. So now, since this track piece is kind of long, what I'm going to do is take the other end and simply just lay it against my shoulder to help guide me as I'm sewing on my extensions, just to keep it in this area. Now what you want to do is make sure all of your hair is going downward so that it doesn't get tangled, and make sure your thread is out of the way so it doesn't have any unnecessary knots. So I'm just going to put it on the outside of the extension here. And now we will begin. You want to take your needle. In the same way we were sewing down our wig cap, we're going to sew the extensions onto our wig cap, which is on our perimeter braid. So I will start here where my cap is on my perimeter braid, and I will take the needle and put it through my cap and my braid here. So once you scoop underneath your braid, you're going to pull all the way through until you bring your track piece all the way up to your head. So now you can see how it's helpful to connect that track piece to make sure you bring it up. So now once again, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go directly underneath my braid and also at the beginning of this extension piece. Under my braid, under my extension piece, and then I'm going to pull the needle through and create my knot. Remember, the knot stays consistent throughout your style. So making sure I have the string adjusted here. Now I'm going to take my needle and do my same knot technique on this piece of thread. So as I grab my needle, and I'm holding my extensions as well, I'm going to wrap it around the thread once, twice, and pull through to create that first knot that's going to hold my extensions to my braids. So now we're going to do it a second time to make sure that the beginning of this extension piece is very secure. So when I let go, it should not come off of my braid. Now I'm going to take my needle once again, feed it directly underneath the weft through the braid. So I'm going to go underneath the braid and the weft. Underneath the weft is going to come back out through the hair there. And you're going to pull your needle all the way through and create your same knot once again. So I take the needle, wrap it around the thread once, twice, and pull all the way through, making sure to keep all of the hairs out of the way. So now that I've secured my knot on my extension piece, I'm going to continue to lay this extension against my braid and continue to sew all the way around. So with my next stitch, I grab my needle, and with my other hand, I hold my extensions to make sure I can see where my braid is. I'm going to go through my braid, underneath my extensions, pull the needle through until I reach up to my thread here. And the same knot technique applies. Once, twice, and pull through. Remember, your same knotting technique will be consistent as you are sewing your extensions down to your braid. Since you've already sewn your cap down to your braid, the same thing applies with your weft. So do not be afraid or overwhelmed that now you're at the moment you have to sew on your extensions. The same technique and the same process applies. You're simply going to make sure you take your needle, go underneath your braid, and then underneath the weft, pull your thread through, and then create your same knot. It's as if you're sewing down your wig cap. So you're going to pull the string all the way up, so you have that opening of string there, and wrap your string around the needle twice, and simply pull through to create your knot. Now that you can see so far, you've stitched pretty much a good distance on your perimeter braid, and you're going to continue to sew this extension all the way around your head directly in the back until you reach the left side, and you're going to continue to sew all the way up where your cap is on your perimeter braid. And if you have any excess weft that hangs over, just simply take your scissors and trim off the excess so that you have your weft extension all the way around your actual perimeter braid. Now that you have finished sewing your track piece all the way around your perimeter braid, we are going to begin to take our second piece and we're going to sew all the way around the base of our invisible part. The same technique applies, and the same knotting technique always applies as well. So we're going to start on one of the points at the beginning of our invisible part base, and I'm going to start on the left side. You're simply going to make sure that your needle and thread is connected to your track piece, and you're going to take that beginning point and place it directly at the beginning here on the side of your braids. So now I'm just going to let the rest of this hair hang over my head as I begin to sew down my piece. So remember, the same thing happens here just like you did around your perimeter braid. You're going to position your weft exactly right on where you're going to begin sewing on the side of your perimeter braid. You're going to go underneath the cap, through the weft, and then you're going to pull all the way through. And you are going to do your knot technique. Once, twice, and pull through. And you're going to do it once again at the beginning of your extension. Make sure that when you sew, you're extremely snug against your perimeter braid where you started there. So I'm going to go underneath the cap, underneath the weft, pull through, and create my knot. So now as I continue to sew all the way around following that thread piece of my perimeter, so I'm going to continue to sew all the way around here. And once I get to this point, if I have any excess weft left over, you're going to trim that off to finish the top of your head. So now that you have sewn your extensions around your perimeter braid along the hairline of your head, and you've also sewn your extension around the actual base of your invisible part style, you will begin to sew your extensions on the rest of your head to fill in the space. I have already started sewing on my extensions to fill in the space behind in the back of my head. For a moment, I will show you how you need to sew your extensions, and I will also show you how to do the fold over method to limit the amount of times you will actually need to cut your hair. So right now, I'm going to pull this little bit of hair over to expose where I am now on my sewing with my extension. So now I'm going to grab this hair and pin it to the other side. As you can see, I have my thread and my needle attached to my extension. And here I made one stitch before stopping. So now what I'm going to do is finish stitching the extensions until I reach all the way to this extension piece, and I will do my fold over method. The fold over method helps so that you don't have to cut your extensions as much, and you continue to sew and flow until you're finished. So what I will do is I will sew down this remaining track piece until it meets there, and then once it does, I will simply fold over the piece, sew on that part where it's been folded, and then continue to sew my extension all the way around my head. By doing this fold over method, it just helps you to continue to flow without cutting your extensions. So now I'm just going to take my needle and thread and make my last few stitches until I reach this point of my extensions on my wig cap. Through the cap, under the weft, create your knot, once around a string, twice around a string, and pull through. Now this will be my last knot here right before I fold over. So right snug against my extensions, I'm going to go through the cap, underneath my extension, pull the needle through, do my knot technique, around the thread once, twice, and pull through. Now this is where you do your fold over method, and you can do this fold over method, remember, throughout your entire head until you keep folding all the way over and all the way back around by sewing all of your hair. So now I'm just going to simply fold the extension over, and I'm going to rest the extension over my head to keep it flat where I want it. And then I'm going to sew my knot exactly where it folds. If you make sure to sew your knot here, it lays as flat as possible and it looks undetectable. So now what you want to do is grab your needle and thread, and after you folded it over and laid it flat, you're going to continue to do the same thing. You're going to go through the cap. Now you're going to go underneath this weft here, and then when you fold it over, you have to go underneath this weft also. So now once I fix that again, I'm going to go through the cap here at the beginning where it starts to fold, underneath both of the wefts. Then I'm going to create my knot, the same knot you always do. Once, twice, and pull through. And you want to create 2 knots every time you fold over to make sure it lays flat. So once again, I'm going to go through the cap, underneath both of the wefts, pull my needle through, and do my knot. So now you have successfully done your fold over method. So you will continue to sew all the way around your head until you get to the other side. And when you get to the other side, you would simply fold over as well. Say for instance, you wanted to stop here and do your fold over because this is the only cap you have exposed. You will simply sew down just enough, fold over your track piece the same way you've just done. And once you fold it over, this part that sticks up here, you make sure to sew that down very solidly with 2 stitches, and then you continue to sew your next layer. Then when you're on your next layer, you do the same thing. You fold over the extension, place it flat at that point where it folds, and put 2 stitches there, and continue to sew until you finish sewing all of your cap. So now that I've successfully folded it over, I can continue to sew my next line of extension. Now that I have finished sewing on all of my extensions around my head, this is what your style should look like at this point. You should only have an area exposed that you will actually sew on your pieces of hair for your invisible part base. In a future step, I will show you exactly in detail how to sew on those individual pieces for your invisible part style. So to review, in this step, I showed you how to prepare your needle and thread. I also showed you how to sew down your wig cap, how to sew down your extensions, and how to do the simple fold over method. In the next step, step number 4, I will be giving you tips, tricks, and advice for doing your invisible part sew-in hairstyle.